How are you?
I wouldn't imagine you're involved with ensuring that the mics are working.
I just turned them on. Oh, I'm not responsible for them, but I know how to use them. So give it a shot now if you want.
You would think I would know this one.
Testing.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Wow, Williamson did a really good job. I almost only had to change a few things. Like, they're like, it was actually,
Yeah, they're getting better and better. I remember the first time I did it.
like, I only had to change minor things. It was really good.
Yeah, it definitely was. Do you want one? The best part about McGill. Where is Zach? Kimber, is Zach still in his office? Okay. No. Okay. Kimber, I do have yours. That was really well done. Actually, can I see that really quickly? Like what's on the back? funny because Zach is presenting first, but he literally
I
just finished his
don't
recording.
have any extra cards on me. This spoon would be somewhere around here.
It's not very pretty. Hi, so everything should be in the folder now. Only thing I guess is if nothing else is on the screen, just have the agenda always.
Yep,
Yep.
that's it. Yeah.
Thank you.
So,
Yep. The audit financial
when there's committee reports,
Yes.
there's a motion.
Motion to adopt. Alright, alternatively, you could also motion to approve.
And we have to adopt the reports. We're gonna report at the end of the
No, these reports are just informal. They don't require.
question here that
Yeah, so it's time for questions.
5 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Okay, do we have do we have to go to the
No, ya están.
No, we don't have to. Okay, that's fine. Just started. Just gonna wait for whenever you're ready.
Hey everybody, if people sitting farther to the back want to move forward because we're not as full as we anticipated, feel free. We're going to be starting in just a few minutes if you wanted to make that switch, so just letting you know.
Yep, it should be. No, it's on a different screen, but I saw it here. Yeah. Okay. Yep, whenever you're ready.
Everyone's good? Okay. Let's go. It is right now 3:15. I'm going to call this meeting to order. Unfortunately, we do not have quorum at this time. So unless we reach quorum, this forum will remain a consultative forum by our internal regulations. As such, no decision taken by this body will be binding on the Student Society of McGill University. From there on, before we start, I have a few points of procedure to remind everyone. Since there were no standing rules specific to this assembly that were approved by Legislative Council, we're only going to operate on the default Robert's Rules of Order. Quick reminder, if you want to address the assembly, come forward to the mic. Once I recognize you, you can address the assembly. Please remember to always speak to the speaker, to me, and not to anyone in particular in the room. That this form of decorum ensures that the level of debate remains cordial and that we can foster a good discussion. Beside that, before you speak, please state your name and faculty for the minutes, so that way the note taker, it's easier for her. If you have any question regarding procedure, please stand up and at any time to ask for a point of order or a point of parliamentary inquiry or whatever interrupting motion you want to address. You can look at your voting card at the back. There's a cheat sheet of Robert's Rules with the most commonly used motion in a forum like a General Assembly. You can either address this assembly in French or English. This is all up to you. This forum is bilingual. As such, we also have a translator who can come to you to help you if you so wishes. She's at the front. Could you please stand so everyone can see? If you need the translator, please just ask her and she'll come to help you. Or you can even ask me by a point of order and I'll address the translator to come to you. For voting, please use your placards and raise it when it's going to be the time to vote in favor or against a motion. If there are any question, please do not hesitate. We have decided to arbitrarily fix the speaking time to 1 minute. If this assembly so wishes to challenge this ruling from the speaker, please do so at this time. Okay, seeing none, we're going to move to some more substantive items. I'd first like to start with the territorial acknowledgement. Ssmu would like to acknowledge that McGill University is situated on the traditional territory of the Ga, a place which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange amongst nations. Ssmu recognizes and respects the Ga as the traditional custodians of the lands and waters on which we meet today. We're going to move to the second item on the agenda, which is the adoption of the agenda. I would now, are there any amendment to the agenda as it stands right now? Yes. Could you please?
I was wondering if we could add item to when hours the executives discussion regarding restructuring the executive portfolio.
So there's an item that was brought forward from the floor. This was submitted to me within the 24-hour period to add a motion from the floor according to our internal regulation. It's to add a discussion regarding the restructuration of the executive committee of Ssmu. This is a discussion item, so it's non-binding on this assembly, and it is brought forward by President Ibrahim. Is it, we good here? So to add an item from the floor, it has to be approved by a 2/3 majority of the members present in this forum. The basis of the vote is to whether or not there's a good justification for this motion to be brought from the floor and not respecting the deadline that was imposed on motion for the General Assembly. So President Ibrahim, could you please come forward and justify as to why this motion is brought at this time and not when the deadline was?
Yeah, so Speaker, the reason for which this motion was not brought in time was simply because it's something that's come to our attention before the deadline, which was October 23rd, and discussions we've had at Legislative Council in the past week, so that's why it's coming now rather than before the deadline.
Perfect. Now going to move to a vote. So the basis of the vote is whether or not this justification satisfies this assembly as to why this motion is brought at this time. All those in favor of adding this discussion item to the agenda? All those opposed? Seeing none, this carries. The agenda is now amended. Do we have any other amendment to the agenda? Okay, seeing none, I would need a motion to approve the agenda. I have a motion moved here. Is it seconded anywhere? Is it seconded over there? All those in favor of approving the agenda as it currently stands? All those opposed? Okay, seeing none, this carries. Let's move to the next item on the agenda, which is the report of the Executive Committee. One by one, the Executive Committee is going to come forward and report on their portfolio. Once their report is done, there will be time for questions to the Executive. We will now start with Vice President Finance and Operation, Zachariah Houston. Can come to the, not to this mic, please. Do you need me to put this bit? Good screen.
Can you see, or would you like the?
Whenever you're ready.
Perfect. Okay, so we have a lot of reports to get through. I'm going to try to keep this short. If people can't hear me as well, let me know, because I tend to speak quietly.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just bring the mic closer to you.
This is so... Okay. Okay, so my name's Zach. I am the Vice President Finance and Operations. First, I'm just going to talk a little bit about what I do. So these are my constitutional duties. Basically, I ensure that Ssmu is financially stable in the long run. I provide the Executive Committee and and Legislative Council with reports on our financial status. I develop our annual budget, which is primarily what I'm working on right now, and I oversee the Society's funds and manage our businesses, primarily Gertz, the Nest, and the student-run cafe. So my portfolio is kind of broken down into two sections. First is finances, which is the operating budget, our funds, so the Health and Dental Reserve Fund, Capital Expenditure Fund, etc., accounting, audit, our long-term finances, student fees, and the funding committee. And the other half is operations, which is mostly Gertz and the student-run cafe. I also sit on a bunch of committees, which I list here, but I'm not going to read them all. Okay. So, over the summer, I worked on the July budget revision, which was a revision primarily to correct errors that were made in the previous April budget before I got here. That took up a lot of time. I also spent most of my summer working on the audit, and I will be presenting the financial statements later today. Frosh also took up a lot of time, and this year we tried a few things differently. We were a lot more involved, or I was a lot more involved with the VP Internal and IOC in terms of planning Frosh, and we don't have the final numbers yet as we're still waiting to be invoiced by McGill, but it looks like Frosh is going to be a balanced budget or an almost balanced budget, so that seemed to pay off. I also worked on student fees over the summer. I had to prepare the Where's My Money Going brochure that we send out to students at the beginning of September, as well as prepare for the fall referendum and prepare the groups for the safety network fee and the other fees that are up for renewal this year. We also commissioned an investment portfolio research project to look into the way that our investment portfolio is managed. Particularly, I'm looking into other universities that have a more student-managed investment portfolio and the different ways that that can work. So there will be more to come, and I'll be reporting to council on that later this term. The last thing that kind of took up a lot of my time this summer was working on the launch of the new student-run cafe, or the new food operation half of the student-run cafe. So I'll talk more about that in a bit. This term, I've been working on the funding committee and improving the way that we process applications. We take about 300 applications per term, so this year we automated it all so that it goes through an online system, which hopefully will reduce the number of errors. It's been working really well, but it still takes a long time, so next term we're hoping to improve the speed that the funding committee can go through applications. I rewrote the finance and operations internal regulations, which basically meant that I was trying to streamline them and make them a lot easier for people to read. And 4 floors. Pardon me. So 4 floors just happened. That went pretty well in terms of finances until we didn't sell out, and we were able to cut a lot of expenses, but at the end of the day, 4 floors ran a deficit, which I will be reporting to council on soon. Unfortunately, I don't have the number yet, but it looks like 4 floors lost probably $2,000 to $4,000, only because we didn't sell out. Everything else managed to come under budget, but there wasn't much that we could do about that. Now, I've been spending most of my time working on the October budget revision. That's going really well. I am trying my best to reduce some of our operational expenses, or to as much as we can reduce the amount of money that we're putting into administration so that we can increase some of the money that goes to governance and executive portfolios and such. One of the biggest ways that we can do that, though, is breaking the events even. So if Frosh goes well, then we'll have a significantly better budget than last year, and I'll have the final numbers on Frosh soon. The Financial Ethics Research Committee is another committee under my portfolio. It primarily reviews our investment portfolio and should review all of our suppliers to make sure that we are purchasing from ethical suppliers. But in the past few years, the FERC has not been able to do the latter half. But I'm happy to report that this year, FERC has already done its biannual review of the investment portfolio and is now working on reviewing all of the suppliers that we annually spend over $5,000 at. And we're hoping to develop a purchasing database and a purchasing policy to govern the suppliers that Ssmu purchases from, which is a project that's been ongoing for a few years. So that's kind of exciting. But you'll have to scroll through. So, kind of nearing the end, Gertz has been doing really well lately. We had a fairly profitable September and October, which is exciting because in last year, Gertz did not do well with all of the construction. There's still room for sales to increase, so one thing that Operations Management Committee will be working on the rest of this term and next term is kind of promoting Gertz in the Nest and seeing how we can better meet what students want. This term I've also been really busy due to the delegation of tasks from our general manager resignation. So I've been spending a lot of time supervising the accounting department, as well as working on hiring a new general manager with the other executives. And I have also been working with the Vice President University Affairs to prepare for our upcoming MOA negotiations with McGill. That's something that came kind of under my portfolio in the reshuffling of tasks that came with our general manager resigning. In terms of upcoming projects for the rest of the club audits, so we're hoping to make that go a lot smoother and get audit scores a lot quicker in the winter term, I've also created a club auditor student staff position so that hopefully a lot more attention will be able to go into fairly auditing the club's bank statements. With funding committee, as I said before, I'm also really hoping to improve the amount of, the speed that funding committee can go through applications with. We've improved the actual online application, but there's still a lot that can be done in order to make funding a fair and fast process for student groups. I'm also planning to work on a budget for our capital expenditure reserve fund. So basically we have a long-term financial plan that governs all of our capital expenditures over a 5-year period, but I'm hoping to come up with more of a short-term plan so that we can really make sure that we're not depleting all of our capital expenditure reserve fund too quickly in the short run. That's a fund that I'll talk more about when I present the financial statements later. For the student-run cafe and GERTS, the Operations Management Committee will be working on refining the mandate for the student-run cafe and the Nest, which is pretty important because the mandate for the Nest was created years ago when it was really different from the way that it is today. We'll also be working on a promotional campaign and soon launching a contest to name the new operation. Lastly, mini courses. I'm working with the mini courses supervisor to completely reshuffle the roles and responsibilities among those staff because we're really hoping to improve the institutional memory in that portfolio. One thing that happens a lot with mini courses is that one instructor leaves or one supervisor leaves and a new supervisor takes over and there's no transition and it often causes issues, and we are hoping to improve that portfolio over the rest of this term. Okay, I will stand for questions.
Are there any questions for the VP Finance and Operation? Okay, seeing none, thank you to Zachary Houston. Let's move to the next report, which is the Vice President University Affairs. Please come to the
Hi everyone, so my name is Chloe and I am the Ssmu Vice President University Affairs. You can go to the next slide. So my portfolio has a lot of stuff in it. And it's going to be kind of hard to give a good idea of all the things that go on in each of those sections, but I'm going to do my best to do it in a short manner. But if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. If you're interested in anything I talk about, or if you want to get involved with it further, because it's really going to be kind of like a very surface level overview. But basically in my portfolio there's a university and academic affairs, so that involves anything to do with the university essentially, whether that be meeting with admin, assigning student reps to sit on university committees, or attending Senate meetings and working with senators or other faculty VP academics. Policy, research, and advocacy. So a lot of university policies, so writing them or revising them, advocating for students' interests and student rights within the university, and then also doing research projects that help further those advocacy goals. I also work with mental health, and that involves working with student services, specifically mental health services and counseling services especially, but student services as a whole to support student well-being, and then implementing some of the mental health policy and 5-year plan that was passed 2 years ago. I'm also in charge of equity, and Indigenous affairs has been kind of an expanded part of that part of the portfolio, as and dealing with general equity concerns and providing educational programming on campus. And the last thing is libraries. So Ssmu has a library improvement fund, which has $650,000 that is allocated every year to improve our library spaces. So basically the library improvement fund committee allocates that money. Extended hours are one of the things that it goes to fund, but also I'm in charge of general library relations. So if there's any concerns or issues with the libraries, that's also under me. Let's go to the next slide. Great, so a little bit about university and academic affairs. So Senate is what is called by the university the highest academic governing body. So essentially a lot of issues get brought up there, but they're not always academic in nature. Student services and equity issues are often discussed there as well. And Senate has multiple standing committees and then multiple subcommittees, multiple advisory boards. In total, there's about 50 committees that students have seats on. We have representation, and there's a total of approximately 85 students that sit on those committees that are all managed by myself. So it's my job to make sure that those students are like actively participating in those committees and reporting back on them, so we're kind of everyone's aware of what's going on. In the past, there hasn't been a lot of institutional memory or like accountability or follow-up with committee representatives, but that's something that I'm really trying to work on to improve, because these advisory boards and committees are often the only opportunity students have a say in a lot of the operations and daily activities of the university. I've also been working with student senators. We've been very active on Senate. We've asked 5 questions so far this year. The topics are on the screen. Questions are a really good way to get discussions going about important topics on campus and get more information about issues or concerns that students may have, and kind of push the university to take more action on them. And then the last thing is that we've been pushing for a fall reading break. So some of you may know that a survey was sent out to all undergraduate students last winter, and it came back that 71% of students were in favor of a fall reading week, and the majority preferred a 5-day break in conjunction with Canadian Thanksgiving. So 2 additional days off plus like the holiday and then the weekend, so 5 consecutive days off. So that's something that we've been really pushing for this year, and hopefully we'll have it implemented. I think the 2017-2018 is the earliest that it can be done. That's a little bit still to be determined if it can be done that early, but that's kind of the nature of the university, that things are often very slow moving and decisions are often made in terms of the academic calendar very far in advance. So next slide. Great, so the other main part of this portfolio is relations with the administration. So one big thing that I'll be responsible conjointly with Zach, the VP Finance, is the Memorandum of Agreement negotiations. So the Memorandum of Agreement, best known as like the MOA colloquially, is essentially a document that governs the relationship between Ssmu and the university from a legal perspective. And basically the MOA, the short version of it is it does like govern, for example, the collection of fees from the Ssmu, but it also puts a lot of restrictions on Ssmu in terms of like the fact that student groups can't use the McGill name. Like you have to be, McGill students, et cetera, instead of just saying like liberal McGill, you have to say McGill students for the Liberal Party, of Canada, et cetera. So it's just like, it's really kind of burdensome. Other ways in which, other things that we want to see changed aside from just the use of the McGill name include permission for the student-run cafeteria to cater on campus, so to expand the activities in that sense, and also to be able to distribute the yearbook at other points on campus. So you can see in that sense, like a lot of our activities on campus outside of this building are very heavily restricted. So we're trying to find a way to create this kind of like mutually beneficial relationships between the university and Ssmu, and to find ways to like less unduly burden the Ssmu in our activities and in our operations. There's also a joint board Senate meeting on creating a smart campus in the 21st century that was attended by senators and myself. We had like a really interesting discussion on what universities are going to look like in like 20, 30 years with like the prevalence of technology and how that's going to affect education, and how does like innovation and community engagement and all these other kind of cross-cutting themes tie into that. So the discussion was actually pretty interesting. So I've also been meeting with like various different administrators, including the principal, the provost, the deputy provost, various other offices within the university to talk about issues as they come up. Next slide. So then the last kind of aspect to this is building relationships between VP academics. So quite often what is seen within the university is decisions are made centrally, so quite often at Senate or by the administration, but the implementation of those decisions, the implementation of those policy changes are left to the faculty and department level to figure out how to do. And oftentimes the policies that are made by Senate or by the university aren't always followed as much as they should be, or not as implemented or enforced as much as they should be. And one example of this is the university student assessment policy. So basically, one of the really important things identified coming into this role was building stronger relationships with VP academics from faculty and departmental associations. So one way I've done that is to try to reestablish the McGill Academic Roundtable, which is all the VP academics from the faculty associations that are invited to attend. And then I also hosted the first ever Student Academic Summit in September, which had a lot of presentations on many different topics that I felt like were kind of like universal universal points in which it would benefit from advocacy at different levels of the university. So universal design and accessibility, that's often implemented kind of at the local level in departments by individual professors in their classrooms, and it's really helpful to have departmental associations and VP academics at that level advocating for those changes. And that's pretty much applicable to kind of any other advocacy initiative that I work on in my portfolio. So next slide. So again, kind of the other, less tangible thing or less apparent thing to the average student that is a big part of my portfolio is policy writing and policy advocacy. University policies are really important because they're long-lasting documents that guide actions and the operations of the university for many years to come. So it's really important that these policies are written in a way that is very pro-student, but that also they're furthermore implemented in a really effective way. So just like to give a brief overview of some of the policies that I'm working on through my portfolio, the sexual assault policy, which will hopefully be approved in the winter semester. We're looking at revising kind of in the long term the student assessment policy, but making some like minor revisions in the short term before that's possible. We're also looking at how can we better implement employment equity policy, and what can we, how can we push for the university to set kind of concrete targets to increase representation of underrepresented minority groups within the faculty of the university. In terms of society research projects, these are projects that are commissioned through my portfolio to support advocacy initiatives. So some include the Alternative History Timeline, Equitable Hiring, Indigenous Academy, and then some other minor projects on like interdisciplinary programs or like the structure of other student unions to better understand like how SMU compares to them. Next slide. And then the last kind of aspect of the section of my portfolio is supporting student advocacy, which turns out can be quite challenging for one person to do. The problem is that a lot of students don't understand or don't know the university administration structure, which is very valid and very fair because it's really complicated and convoluted, and you really need someone to kind of sit down and walk you through it. So I'm trying to find ways in which that information can be better distributed to students. So I'll be hosting like kind of like a training for anybody who's interested in learning about how the university is organized. So like navigating McGill's organizational structure and like sort of like a guide or like strategies for student advocacy so that you can actually create changes within the university structure if that's something that you're interested in doing. I'm also trying to revive the Policy and Advocacy and Resource Committee, which is supposed to be kind of like an impartial, neutral committee that's sort of an arm's length from my portfolio that is a resource or a service to students that like kind of enables student advocacy. And that's kind of like in case, maybe an advocacy project doesn't fit in line with like SMU's political stances, but like you still want to support a student in their advocacy, in their pursuit of that advocacy. So that is kind of the idea behind PARC. And then future projects include like a Know Your Rights campaign to educate students about their academic rights and pushing for more open educational resources. If anyone has any questions about those things, feel free to ask me about them afterwards. So mental health. Mental health is something I really care about, and was one of the big reasons that I wanted to run for this position. I'm working with student services to look at ways to provide more upstream services and try to address the long wait times, for example, for mental health services. We also plan a Mental Health Awareness Week. We're working on creating a mental health space. And we're also starting a Happy Lights lending program, which will allow students to rent lamps that are clinically proven to treat seasonal affective disorder from the SMU office for a deposit of $20. And we're also planning a mental health open forum for next semester. So here are some of the pretty graphics that we used during Mental Health Awareness Week. Can you move next slide? Great. So equity is another big part of my portfolio. We are hiring our first ever Indigenous Affairs Coordinator who will hopefully be spearheading a reconciliation campaign in March, which is really exciting, and as well as like institutionalizing some Indigenous solidarity initiatives such as the Traditional Territory Acknowledgement. We also were involved in Consent McGill campaign. We hosted trivia night, tabling sessions, and a panel event on intersectionality. Equity complaints and concerns. So one of the things that we've realized is an issue is that it's not always clear to students what resources or what support SMU Equity can provide to them. So we really want to promote that SMU Equity can be a resource if you want to understand how to make your events or your initiatives more equitable. but also make it really clear to students when they're triggering a formal equity complaint, because once you've triggered that procedure, it's a very formalized restrictive procedure, and I think it's not really clear to students sometimes when they're entering that and when they just want to kind of consult an equity commissioner just to hear their feedback or hear their input on a certain initiative. We were involved in kind of like Frosh Safari and Wisc McGill. They were both equity concerns that were raised against Wisc McGill and MUS, and Ssmu Equity attempted to kind of help change the event to make it more equitable and address those concerns that were raised by the community. And then in terms of some future projects, we're hoping to expand the diversity of equity programming on campus to like incorporate humor or like art or other creative forms besides just like the traditional forms, which are like often workshops as educational programming. And then we're also looking to increase our partnerships with student groups on campus. So next slide. Cool. So kind of the final part of my my portfolio is library relations. So we talked a lot with the law library about some of the concerns that were raised last semester about access to the law library during exams. It was closed off on the 3rd and 4th floor, and there's a lot of students that are very concerned about that, especially because the extended hours are funded through the LIF, which all students pay for. But we've come with a compromise that most parties seem to be very in favor of, that involves students having access during those extended hours and one weekend day, and then those 2 floors being restricted only during the daytime to law students. I've also attended meetings to talk about the library master plan. If anyone wants to see it, it's really cool. There's like these really beautiful architectural designs. You can click on the link in our presentation. It's for the Redpath and McLennan libraries that will hopefully, one day, if the money is secured, be renovated into this much more beautiful space. And then the last is library improvement fund. So we're focusing on increasing the number of applications and student submitted applications for the future. So because as in past years, there's been less student written submissions. So next slide. Cool. So the last 2 things are really kind of some of the things that I've been taking on as part of my role since the VP internal resigned. So I've been helping with the redesigning of the Ssmu website. So we are planning on redesigning the Ssmu website because it's really not very well organized and it's hard to find information. So we released a survey to let students tell us what they want to see changed about it, and we'll be massively revamping it over the coming months. And the last thing is the yearbook fee. So we made the decision this semester to pose a plebiscite question that will be asked of students this coming referendum period to get better information about how such a fee would be structured. Cool. So yeah, here is some contact information on the next slide. If you're interested, you should like my Facebook page, the Ssmu University Affairs Facebook page for more updates on my portfolio. And email any one of those people. I have a lot of student staff at my portfolio that do a lot of great work and can answer your questions if you have any. Great. Does anyone else have any questions?
Any question for the VP? Yes, could you come to the front? If there are any... Sorry? Yes, for the secretary, please.
Hi, Farnell Morissette, Law. I'm just wondering, since it's likely to be an issue again, what is the SSMU's position on the law library's 4th and 5th floor?
I believe that it was the 3rd and 4th floor that were restricted in the past years.
Yeah, sorry, the top floor.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So it was something that we consulted Ssmu Council on. We brought a proposal. We asked those counselors to go back and talk to their faculty associations and consult those constituents in that sense too. We did a straw poll and unanimously kind of approved. So I don't anticipate it being as much of a controversy. I think that the accommodation that was provided for students as a whole on campus sort of met the needs of the general undergraduate population while also taking the specific needs of the law students to have access to those materials during their take-home exams. So it seemed like by all parties involved that it was kind of like an amicable compromise. The LSA was heavily involved with that, as well as, all counselors and Senate caucus as well. So from what I've heard, it's been like kind of hopefully a peaceful compromise, and hopefully there won't be that same backlash that was from last semester.
Thank you.
Great.
Any other question for the VP? Okay, seeing none, we can give her a good round of applause. Please invite the VP Clubs and Services to come to the front for her report.
Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, so hi, my name is Kimber. I'm the VP Clubs and Services. Since Chloe ended off her presentation with a shameless Facebook page plug, I'm going to do the same and start mine off. As you may notice, the beautiful stylization of my presentation here matches my cool new Facebook page. So if you haven't already gone and liked Ssmu Clubs and Services, please do so. So, just going to get started by telling you a little bit about what I actually do before I start getting into projects for this year. So up on the screen here, I have my job description as per the Constitution, which essentially just outlines all of my constitutionally mandated duties. Essentially working with the services, working with student groups, and managing the university center. So all of those bullet points are essentially a very long, convoluted way of saying I have two major aspects of my portfolio: student groups and the building. So in practice, this bullet pointed list is what that actually means and what I actually do on a day-to-day basis. So on the student group side, for the most part, it's a lot of administrative work, working with individual groups on supporting them with whatever is going on. So just a couple of things listed up here: conflict resolution and crisis management, a lot of work with legal and insurance, general resource provision, executive support, executive training as well is something that goes on a lot, especially during the month of September. General like logistical support, collaboration, representation on legislative council, and collaboration on fee levy campaigns is up there as well. Can we scroll up a little bit? The second, oh, kidding, too far, go back. No, you missed it. Anyway, the second thing that was on that slide was building management. So what I do in terms of building management, working with different permanent staff to oversee things like renovation projects, which is something that we had a lot of over this past summer. General like long-term building visioning, which is something that I'll talk about soon as one of the projects that I'm working on for this year. General building maintenance and working with different Ssmu staff, and tenants and leases. So we also have 7 tenants that I do general tenant relations with. In terms of how I accomplish a lot of these things, a lot of them are done through committees. So I have a giant list of the committees that I sit on here. And a lot of the aspects of my portfolio, particularly for student groups, have committee support as well. So for example, anytime a new club is approved, it goes through the club committee. Service reviews is a major project that I'm working on this year, and I have the services review committee to support in that. There's essentially a committee that works with every major aspect of my portfolio, and I also act as the general representative of Ssmu on issues related to space on campus, because that is so connected to building management. So the last couple committees on there are McGill committees that I sit on as the Ssmu rep. So hopefully that gives you a rough idea of what I do day to day. So I just want to go through a couple of the projects that I've been working on over the past semester, and kind of things that I'll be working on for the rest of the semester as well. So general club-related things that I've been doing so far. This year we saw the expansion of activities night, so we extended it from regularly being in just the building to onto the street as well, which was excellent on the first night, and then thunderstorm scare on the second night, but that's okay. First night went well enough that it's all good. Other general things I've been working on: increasing the visibility of the portfolio. You already heard my shameless plug for my Facebook page. Generally working on improving the clubs and services section of the website as well, and making sure that that information is communicated transparently. Other general projects, so the creation of the club consultative committee is something that the club representatives have been working on as well, just to kind of create more venues for club executives to provide feedback on what's going on in the clubs and services portfolio. And general club resource development. So for example, right now I'm working on the revision of a complete new club handbook. I've been working with the SPVM over the summer to try and establish police checks for our student groups. Lots of different smaller scale resource provision projects are going on the club side of things. In terms of services, so one of the major projects that's been taking up a lot of my time over the course of this semester is the reintroduction of service reviews. So service reviews are something that have been mandated of this position at least in recent years. They haven't been done since 2011, so generally we don't have any data on how our services are doing, ways we could be improving them, what students think of them. So that's something that we have pretty much been doing from scratch this year. So I have the Services Review Committee working on that. Right now we have a survey open, so if you have had experiences with any of our Ssmu services, so just for reference, that's things like Nightline, MCERT, Walk Safe, Drive Safe, Players Theater, Midnight Kitchen, any of those, if you have interacted with them, if you've used their service and you have feedback on how they can improve, or if you just think they're really great and want the Services Review Committee to know that, I encourage you to fill out that survey and distribute it. Other general services projects, so revision to services HR was something that I worked on over the summer, kind of streamlining the process for services and cutting out some of the unnecessary things. Generally developing new promotional strategies, so right now I am working with TVM on the creation of essentially a series of promotional videos for services to kind of revamp our services listing on the website, which right now isn't terribly informative. It doesn't give you the best idea of what our services actually do. And supporting services in the coordination of fee levy campaigns. So 4 of our services are going through that right now, and there'll be a couple more next semester, so that generally takes up a lot of time around referendum periods. And then the last major aspect of my portfolio that I wanted to talk about, some of the general projects that I'm working on, is the building. So things that have been going on in the past couple of months, creation of new bookable boardroom spaces on the 4th floor, for general space improvements in the building. So the building committee is one of the committees in my portfolio, and it's tasked with distributing the space fee allocation every year. So that's $40,000 that goes towards general space improvements in the Ssmu building. Notably, this is the only Ssmu committee that is not a majority of students. So historically, the members of the building committee have come up with projects that they would like to see funded in the building and then voted on which would be implemented. This year, we're taking the proposals directly from students, so we know what you actually want to see in the building. So in the past couple of listservs, a proposal form has gone out, so if you have brilliant ideas for things that you would like to see in the building that would improve student space, I encourage you to fill it out. So far, everyone's saying they want to see the couches replaced in the student lounge, so if you think that's a good idea, feel free to go fill out the form and agree. If you have a better idea, also let us know. The building committee is going to be reviewing all of the proposals and funding as much as we can. The last major building project that I'm going to be working on kind of as a long-term project throughout this year is the development of a new long-term building vision. So currently we have a 10-year plan for our building that was done in 2009 and then kind of forgotten about and never really followed up on. And now that we're at the 5-year point, I'm doing a complete revision of that plan, looking at kind of where we've come so far, if that's still in line with what students want to see in our building in the long run. So we've been doing a couple different projects related to that. So the first was the creation of the ad hoc space committee. So this committee is just looking at kind of generally what do students want to see in the building. They're going to be helping with the coordination of a consultation campaign, which will be coming your way soon. We've just been doing other general ways of kind of gauging how our building is now and how we'd like to see it improve. So last weekend we did an energy audit on the building. We have an accessibility audit coming up. So just generally looking at what our building is now and what we want it to be in the future. So if any of you have any feedback on that, I would love to hear it. And then the last major thing that I wanted to talk about for what I've been up to is just the things that I have been responsible for in the absence of the VP internal, the general manager, and the building director. So on the vice president internal side, you all now receive weekly listservs from me. So I have taken over the MailChimp duties. If any of you have feedback on the listserv or would like to see something that you're not seeing now, I encourage you to get in touch. Chairing the Student Engagement Committee is also something that was under the Vice President Internal that I am now taking on. So that committee started meeting as of last week and is going to be working on kind of general consultation projects throughout the course of this semester. Things I've taken on for the building director, a lot of supervision of staff, which comes with a lot of HR responsibilities, general tenant relations, and taking a more active role in communicating with McGill about building projects. So for example, the project that's going on right now with the access ramp in front of the building is a McGill project, not a Ssmu project, so there's more liaison work than there would be for any kind of project that was going on within our building that was a Ssmu project. And then as for the general manager, just general supervision of staff, taking on insurance, and working with the other executives on general manager recruitment. So that, for the most part, sums up kind of the major things that I've been working on over the course of the past semester. If you have general feedback on me on what's going on in the portfolio, I have an anonymous feedback form that goes out at the bottom of every one of my clubs and services listservs. So if you have things to say, I would love to hear them. No one has actually filled out anything in this form yet, so if you have comments, you would be the first. But that would be great. I would appreciate the feedback. And if you have any suggestions for new projects, things you'd like to see in the portfolio, comments about the building, anything like that, I encourage you to get in touch with me directly. My email is in the report as well. Yeah, I stand for questions.
Any question for the Vice President? Yes, please come forward.
Igor Sadikov, Arts.
Sorry, could you,
yeah.
is the mic on?
Is it on? Yeah.
Could you please restate your name and faculty?
Igor Sadikov, Arts. I just have a question about the commercial tenant leases in the building that are expiring. I think last year Council passed a motion to the effect that these leases would not be renewed. So I was just wondering what's going to be the effect on the building, like what's Ssmu's current plan for the use of these spaces, and also if you can speak to that, what's the financial impact?
Yeah, so worth noting that the council motion doesn't entirely bar new commercial leases. It just says they would need to be approved by council by exception.
Let me just restate the question for everyone's clarity. It was, what's the plan for all the commercial space right now when the leases expire?
Unfortunately, the real answer to that question is tenant lease negotiations are unfortunately confidential. So I'm not really able to talk extensively about what's going on with tenants, if anyone is currently negotiating leases, or what those spaces would be otherwise at this time. So I'm sorry, that was a really poor answer, but unfortunately, I'm not able to speak to that.
Okay, thank you.
Any other question for the Vice
If anyone has
President?
any questions I can answer, that would be great.
Yes.
Hi, Farnell Morissette Law. Can you hear me? Okay. I have been told that the Legal Information Clinic here has requested better space. I've personally volunteered there a few times. The space is not ideal, and the request has been denied. I was wondering if you'd comment as to whether or not there's a reason or why that is.
Again, that would be a tenant lease negotiation, which is confidential, so I cannot speak to that. I'm really sorry.
Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions not about tenant leases? Okay, cool. Well, thank you.
I would invite the Vice President External Affairs to come forward.
I'm just going to set a timer on my phone, so otherwise I won't talk forever. Okay, cool. Oh, wow. I didn't even realize I was being videotaped. That's so fun. Okay. All right. So hi, everyone. My name's Emily. I'm the VP External. So we can go to the overview of my portfolio. My portfolio consists of three main things: community affairs, political campaigns, and external relations. It's a really fun portfolio, and I am excited to talk about it here today. So if you look at this lovely tree, this is a presentation I did on the history of Ssmu and the Quebec student movement. For those of you who aren't aware, Quebec students historically have been more organized than perhaps any other student group across North America. We really know how to organize and fight for student rights, and that's something that Ssmu has been participating in since the 60s, so that's really cool. You can read that project on the Ssmu External Affairs website. So this semester we've been participating, can we keep going? Sorry, can we keep going on the presentation? Oh, okay, cool, sorry. This semester we are participating in the formation of two new student federations. So last semester, there's a federation that sort of died, and then there was a bunch of new student associations that were free agents, and so we started participating in the creation of these two new student federations. Just briefly, I put a slide there on why we should join a student federation, or why I think it's a good idea to be participating in these, and that I attached my job description, which says lobby the government.
That is extremely hard to do as a single individual, and so it is really, really helpful to sort of join up with other student unions to really amplify our voice. And I listed some other reasons as to why that's a really cool idea. Anyway, so we've been working with these two provincial student associations. There is the AVEC and the UQ, or the Union Étudiante Québec, and the Association for the Voice of Education in Quebec. These two student associations, have been forming since April. I've had probably like monthly meetings for each, sometimes a little bit more. I'm currently sitting on the coordination committee for AVEC, so that's really exciting. So I'll go briefly between the differences between these two new associations. If you scroll down, this first one is a screenshot from the AVEC website, which just launched on Friday. It's really exciting. Is an association, which I said we've been actively participating in. I sit on the coordination committee, and therefore I've been helping to write policies and stuff like that. The fee levy is $3.50 per student per semester. And it is one association, one vote, so everyone has the same vote around the table. Scroll down a little bit further. The other association which we've been an observer at since April is the Union Étudiante Québec. This association has a fee levy of $4.50 per student per semester, and the voting method is a double majority, which means it goes through one association, one vote, and then it goes through a semi-proportional voting system right after. So it has to pass through two votes. Every motion or whatever has to pass through two votes. Currently, both associations are accepting affiliations from different campuses across Quebec, and so Ssmu will likely be bringing a affiliation referendum question to the student body next semester in the winter. And I've been giving presentations at council, and we're going to be having presentations from both associations come. So I'll definitely make sure those dates are public so anyone who's interested can come. And let's move on. The External Affairs Committee works on a lot of stuff related to external policies, so things like tuition and accessible education, that sort of thing. We're hoping to take a good look at the accessible education policy this semester. Continue. So the next part of my portfolio is political campaigns. This has been a really exciting and active part of my portfolio since the beginning. So one of the cool things that we've been working on this year is the anti-austerity campaign. So you can scroll down, that's the website. It's fuckausterity.com. It's pretty exciting. And we've also had a couple of different events. So we had Anti-Austerity Week in September. We had a demonstration to the Quebec Teachers Union strike, and just recently a demonstration contingent on November 5th to the SA demonstration. I've been working with a newly formed sort of group called McGill Against Austerity on different sorts of anti-austerity projects, so that's been really fun. Moving on, we've also been doing some stuff related to climate justice. So I've been working with the ICO Coalition, or Students Against Pipeline Coalition, and along with on these two projects, the demonstration against the pipelines and the Conference of Youth, which is happening at the end of November. And then I've also been working with Ssmu Ga on some more external things like the Climate Welcome, which was just this weekend. That was really fun. I also support student-run campaigns. That's really fun. I work with Ssmu Ga and Demilitarize McGill mostly, and we've been doing a lot of fun events. So if you scroll down to the next one, Ssmu Ga had Fossil Free Week, which was really huge. That was where all the tents were located outside in Community Square. It was just really fun. A lot of good participation in that week. Demilitarize McGill has a series of events coming up next week. They operate mostly autonomously, but I'm happy to support them whenever I can. Ssmu Ga has also been doing further engagements with CAMSA and stuff. Another political campaign sort of is the Go Vote campaign, the McGill Votes campaign. That's been really fun. Obviously, it was a really exciting year to start campaigning on voting and stuff. That was really fun. So we launched the McGill Votes campaign. That's a screenshot from it. We had a video. The McGill Votes video was just like a bunch of people like jumping around and being excited to vote. We had a federal election debate with candidates here with CKT, and then a panel event on democracy and voting in general. I've also been working with QPIC this semester, and we worked on events like Culture Shock. Next semester I'll be working with events like Social Justice Days. Culture Shock just happened. It was all around science fiction. It was amazing. It was awesome. I think there's going to be some recordings up, so I'd highly recommend watching them. Community affairs is another great part of my portfolio. So I get to work with the Milton Park community as well as the Community Engagement Committee. We're going to be doing things like community engagement mixers, and then with the Milton Park side, I helped out with Frosh and harm reduction around there, and I will be doing future things such as the garbage survey
interestingly enough. VP external delegation. So I've been working with the CAF, or the Francophone Commission, the SPIN, or the Student Society Programming Network, and we did things like organize 4 floors. We're also going to be working on some sober events, and the CAF has a couple of upcoming conferences. Another part of my job that I don't talk about a lot is governance and administration. I just wanted to point out that I supervise 10 staff right now, and I have a few more upcoming. I work with the executive team on things like GM, hiring, smooth restructuring, etc. And then I have worked at council. I passed a climate change policy. That was really exciting. And worked with the Community Engagement Committee and the External Affairs Committee, as I've spoken about already. Next slide. All right, that's just a summary of my portfolio. Can be found on smuexternalaffairs.ca. And I would highly recommend checking it out for any future questions about my portfolio. So thank you so much for listening.
Any question for the VP? Please come to the front.
Yay.
State your name and faculty.
François Paul Truc, Science. Yeah, just a quick question. Like we were told before that by VP Zachariah Houston that 4 floors ran over budget because of lack of attendance. Could you speak a little bit on that and why that happened, and how, I know that there's been large attendances in the past, so maybe why that happened and how we can improve in the future?
Certainly. So 4 floors didn't sell out this year, and it ran a bit of a deficit. 4 floors, we started a little bit later this year. So when I started taking over for the VP Internal on SPIN, they actually hadn't chosen a theme yet or done any graphics, so it took us a little bit longer to get the theme and the event up. That was a little bit unfortunate. We also switched to online ticket sales this year. So that, we thought at the very beginning, this is something that was suggested by the previous VP Internal, that it was going to be this great idea, the line was going to go away, people were going to be, it's going to be so much more convenient for students. But we sort of realized that the line itself was a major form of promotion, and so we found with the online ticket sales, especially since they listed the number of tickets that had been sold, and we kept doing multiple rounds, it sort of lost the urgency, and people didn't go as much. So we ended up selling about 600 out of, I think last year they sold about 900. So it's unfortunate that we didn't fully sell out, but I still think that everyone who came had a good time, and equity complaints were 0. There was no equity issues. There was no issues with MCERT. MCERT thought it was a really calm year. The programming was amazing on the 2nd floor, and it was in general a very positive event, even if it was less attended.
Any other question? Yes.
Hi, Farnell Morissette, Law. There seems to be a decision that's going to have to be made eventually about which student federation SSMU wants to affiliate with. That's probably going to be a very important decision given what's likely to come. I was wondering, first of all, can you give us an idea or commit to a time when representatives from both federations could be able to present to council and to the student body at large, and also if you could let us know how that decision is going to be made, if it'll be a decision by council or by referendum, and anything else you might want to add.
Absolutely. I'm really glad you asked about this, actually. I was rushing, so I didn't want to go into too much. But anyways, basically last council, I gave a presentation on the 2 different associations, and I asked council sort of informally whether they wanted me to continue to going to both associations, and they voted overwhelmingly in favor to continue going to both different associations for the time being. They also suggested that we do 2 presentations, so I'm hoping to do those in the first council of the winter semester. This gives us time to essentially just get a representative from both organizations to come in January, and it's just before our winter referendum. Just before the winter referendum, I hope to have council decide which organization we're going to be putting on the ballot, and then on the ballot we'll run a referendum. The referendum, because it's a fee levy, it has to go through referendum, so the students will decide if they do want to join that organization or not.
Follow-up question, if I may, Mr. Speaker. Does that mean that council will decide which options will be available to the student body through the referendum?
Yes. All referendum questions go through council.
Follow-up question?
Make sure you phrase it as a question.
Yes. I would ask then, what kind of representations are going to be made to the student body in general before council, if any, about the options before them?
Yeah, so I spoke to council about this last council, and I said that I would be really, really happy to come speak to individual councils before making a full decision at council, especially on the topic of provincial representation in general. A lot of McGill students don't really understand what these provincial student associations actually do. So that's been something that I really want to be focusing on, at least for the next 2 months, and I know that Arts and Science has already invited me to come, and I hope I get more invitations from other different student associations to come and talk about it. And then hopefully your representatives will be able to do sort of adequate consultation before the presentations come to council and before we decide what's going on in the referendum.
Thank you.
Any other question for the Vice President? Yes. State your name and faculty for the Secretary.
Hi, I'm Jonathan. I'm from the Faculty of Law. Just for full disclosure, I'm on the executive of the UEQ, and really glad to hear about this from Emily. Emily and I have been in touch for a couple of months now. I'm just curious about the consultation process outside of council. Will that involve representatives from either of the associations, or will that be really just the executive Ssmu and the faculty associations?
I had originally said it would just be me, and that was mostly because of the unequal resources between the two different associations. Obviously, as an executive of the UEQ, you're much more able to come to these different associations, but given that the EVEC has one staff and they live in Chicoutimi, it's a lot more difficult for them to be able to give that equal representation. I really am trying to create a balanced debate here, but it's a lot harder when we have executives from one association who are right here.
Any other questions for the Vice President? Okay, seeing none, we can give her a good round of applause.
Thank you.
I would invite now the President to come forward for his report.
All right, hey everybody. So I guess we're gonna go over my report. So this little graphic you see pictured here is what I call a brief overview of the year so far. Yeah, trying to think, it's fine. Everything is fine. But you will find out more in detail through this report how we're dealing with things that are maybe not so fine. So, a little brief overview of how I've designed this report for you folks. So basically, the hope is that it's a bit confusing to both compartmentalize everything in terms of my responsibilities, but also address some of the tasks that have been delegated to me, like the other executives, from the absence of both our general manager, our daycare director, and the VP internal. So anything you see in red is something that was someone else's task that has been delegated to myself, and anything in green is something new. And you'll see that link that you folks have access to if you go online. You can also see my calendar. I thought that would be cool for you folks to just get an idea of what it's like. Because, not only is it difficult on the average year to, I guess, have an idea of what us executives do, it's a bit, convoluted at times, so we're making a strong effort to make that kind of transparent. And I guess we'll begin. So traditionally, there are 4 areas of my portfolio this year, 5. There are governance, meaning council and things of the like. There's human resources, also known as HR. There's sustainability and environmental, in fact. And there's representation and advocacy, so working with the administration. And this year, a new part of my portfolio is family care. So I'll go into that in detail as we move forward. So in terms of governance, things with Legislative Council this year have been going quite well. A lot of my work is fairly administrative, so as much as I would have liked to think coming to this position I could take on all these cool projects and do these cool things, a lot of my work is more just keeping the operations of the office of our legislative processes up and running. So a lot of it is simply continuing what was status quo, but there are some changes as well. Something exciting regarding council, for example, this year is that we implemented clickers, which is cool. So now not only after council can you see how your representatives voted to hold them accountable to, let's say, consultation that was had with you as a constituent, but in addition, there's no process at council that people necessarily feel pressure to vote any certain way. So we've tried to make that process more transparent. In addition, something that we're exploring, although probably not necessarily this year, but is on our minds, is this restructuring of our board of directors. This is just a thought right now, but at present, council is tasked with a lot of work, not only the political undertakings of the society, but also the legal and the financial. At other students' unions, the board of directors and council have divided roles in that regard, but our hope was essentially to make our council our board of directors, but simply having a board of directors was more of a legal obligation, and we wanted to see everyone have input on basically every single thing that we do here at the society. Moving forward, I'm actually just going to move to the other side, if that's okay. I can't really read the screen. Great. Sorry if that was hard for you, TVM. Yep, so our summer board was implemented this year as well, but we're still fixing that up. It was basically just done electronically. My obligations in terms of council also involve organizing councilor and senator retreat, which happened in September, and coordinating the different orientations that happened with them, our equity trainings, and all but one of our seats right now for council are vacant, so all of them have been filled, thankfully. And in terms of the committees that I sit on the Internal Regulation Review Committee, so that's reviewing all of our governance documents, so our constitution, and the internal regulations, also known as bylaws, of all of the different portfolios, and also all our other governing documents, so our policy and plans book, our committee terms of reference, things like that. We have a commissioner for said purpose. And I also sit on the steering committee, which meets before every council to look over motions and all submissions to council. Steering committee is also a relevant body to you folks, because, for example, if you had sought to submit something to the GA, you would have submitted it to Eileen and Benjamin, our parliamentarian and speaker, and they would have brought it to the steering committee. Basically, the purpose is to make sure that it all the things included therein make sense in terms of discussions that will be moving forward. In terms of the General Assembly, this is my undertaking and is traditionally done jointly with the Vice President Internal, but due to their vacancy, I took this on this year independently with the help of a few various staff members. In terms of governance document review, last year we saw the transition from the bylaw books to different portfolio internal regulations, and that process is ongoing. So if you are interested in governance documents, if you want to look at mine, we're looking those over over the months of October and November. They're like 100 or so pages. It's quite extensive. We're looking to cut it down to make it a bit more accessible, because documents don't need to be long just for the sake of being long. So if you have any thoughts on that, feel free to share. I also chair President's Roundtable, which is a group that meets monthly. It's more of a group that is for resource sharing, in terms of how we can bring about best practices in student associations and also collaborate. And it's not really a group that has any voting power or binding decision making. The biggest endeavor there were two. The first being the last minute graduation photography contract about 3 years ago. Ssmu undertook to put that under us rather than have each faculty organize it independently. Long story short, not super interesting. And we've been renegotiating our MOA with the faculties and that contract itself. You'll be excited for any of you who are graduating that now digital composites are available, so you don't have to purchase the paper ones, and you'll have that access forever online, which is way better. In terms of the judicial board, traditionally the general manager undertakes this, because we try to have both the J board and election Ssmu be at arm's length from the executive due to conflicts of interest, things of the like. But since that isn't, we don't have a general manager right now. That's been under the Vice President Clubs and Service portfolio, but I just wanted to touch on that. We're also reviewing those documents. So the large majority of my time this year has been dedicated to human resources, as you can imagine. I work quite closely with the human resources advisor and the general manager, and we've basically, in the absence of the general manager, I've taken on, as you can see here in red, a lot of obligations that are not traditionally my own. So keeping office morale high and that community strong, because all of the staff and executives are very overworked, has been a really important point for me. So we've been organizing socials and trying to just reaffirm how important every member of our team is, because as you notice, when folks leave, things can get harder, and we care about the work they put in. So in addition, upon the resignation of the general manager, a large part of my work was not only to inform our staff and the student body of what we'll be doing going forward, but also coming up with a contingency plan. So as you may have noticed, if you looked at that lister that we sent out not too long ago, we sent out a memo just explaining what our plan is going forward. Despite the, I guess, not so ideal nature of our finances this year, as they're quite strained. We have recruited a hiring firm to do a lot of the headhunting for us. We saw really dramatic repercussions of not having a general manager over the past 8 months, and the ideal is that they stay around for anywhere from 5 to 12 years at a time. Annual turnover in any large organization is very destabilizing, and we want to make sure that there's institutional memory, and that is really the largest undertaking of the general manager. So yeah, although this executive recruitment firm is expensive, we're hoping to really cut our losses, take no risks, and have someone great come in beginning January. That's the hope, but there's no guarantees. As you can imagine, recruitment is a long and thorough process, especially for a full-time position. In terms of other matters, if we can scroll down, related to human resources, the following staff are those who were previously supervised by the general manager and now supervised by myself. Something that you'll find interesting is that often the role of the executive is kind of torn between the political one, which is more visible and I think what attracts students the most. And then there's the managerial aspect, which often gets very neglected and is much harder to undertake, because supervising dozens of student staff, let alone permanent staff, is quite an undertaking. So these are the permanent staff that I am supervising, and yeah, I'll touch more on that later. And another large portion of my time that has been taken up has been in terms of conflict resolution. So managing interdepartmental, interpersonal conflicts in the office can be quite time consuming, because you have to make sure you're soliciting everybody's opinions in an unbiased way and consulting with folks who have felt unfairly treated in the process, having their needs addressed, etc. So unfortunately, the large bulk of that kind of work can't really be reported on, like many of the other executives who have more administrative duties in their role. But that is that. In terms of student staff, something that I undertook this year that I don't normally undertake is organizing student staff orientation. So for our 200 student staff that we have between the GERTS, the NEST, and all the different portfolios, we have about 6 trainings that we offer them, not all of which are mandatory, and I facilitated the office training because the general manager is typically the office manager, so did that in their absence and revised the orientation guide. In terms of supervision of student staff, in black font, you'll see the ones who I typically manage. In the red are those who are managed by the general manager, now under my supervision as well as of September. And 2 in green are 2 new positions, which is very exciting. And I'll touch on more on those later in sections that are more relevant. In terms of the executive, so as president, my role is largely to support the executives in what they do. I chair executive committee, and to really jump in whenever there are things that could use more hands on deck. So it's kind of an everything role in that way. But yeah, it's nice because I get to be in touch with where everyone's up to and lend a hand where I can. In terms of the resignation of the VP internal, it was quite similar to what happened with the general manager. We issued a memo, touched base with our staff, delegated responsibilities, and there are links in both of those sections where you folks can actually see the detailed delegation of responsibilities if you are interested to see that. In terms of the other things that I would typically do with the VP internal, the only thing in addition to the General Assembly is the Centraide campaign, which I'll talk about more later. I'm not sure how I'm doing for time, so if anyone wants to chime in, I'm sorry. And we're having a retreat next weekend, and we're also doing a project called Restructuring Ssmu. There's a discussion right after my report regarding this, so you folks will be kept in the loop, and we want to hear your thoughts because ours are not formed. They shouldn't be formed because we haven't asked you, and we have lots of ideas to put forward, but no conclusions regarding how we're going to really fix this issue of really large workloads put on executives that lead to burnout and portfolios that are not fully attended to during the year. In terms of representation and advocacy, I sit on Senate and the Board of Governors and do a lot of that work jointly with the VP University Affairs, Chloe. And if we could scroll down, majority of that work this year in terms of Senate has been my involvement with the subcommittee on Aboriginal peoples. So there are a few projects we have going on there, which is very exciting, and you can read more about there, namely regarding the potential lobbying for an Indigenous Secretariat in 2021, so for the 200th anniversary of McGill, and traditional territorial acknowledgement, which is actually moving forward quite soon, which is exciting. In terms of the Board of Governors, we met on October 8th and discussed Yeah, the financial statements and basically McGill's recent allegations regarding the violations of Bill 100, so executive pay raises. A lot of what the Board of Governors does is basically review what Senate does and kind of stamp it. There's very little controversy. It's very collegial, things like that. So it's not all too exciting, but it's a cool place to be. I sit on the Committee to Advise on Matters of Social Responsibility, so CAMSR. This is the committee to which Divest McGill is petitioning and asking for divestment. So we've met twice since the beginning of my term. We're meeting in 2 days. It's an exciting time. Divest McGill has been doing an amazing job in bringing their information to CAMSR and such, so looking forward to seeing how that goes. And in terms of campus relations, I won't really go in too much detail. This report, in my mind, I like to think of it as a bit of an accountability measure and also for you folks to know what we've been up to. But I don't think it's too necessary that I touch exactly on what we have been doing as Ssmu execs with each of the different associations. But if you're curious to see what our relationship is with various different offices on campus, you can check that out there. If we just want to scroll down a little bit, I can tell you folks a bit about Seamless. Seamless happened just under a month ago. It was a student executive conference that I'm responsible for organizing, and it went super well. We organized it with Campus Life and Engagement and PGSS and the McGill Alumni Association. In terms of other things that are likely of interest to you, so I sit on the Food and Dining Advisory Committee called FADAC, and basically exciting news on their end is that there's a new location opening up in Trottier called Paramount, which has shawarma and shish taouk. I know, really exciting, and it's all halal. So I mean, raise the roof. Life is great. Also, if you have dietary restrictions, great news is they're hoping to be posting the ingredients for all of their products online soon. So great in terms of accessibility. Also, if you just want to know what you're eating, because I mean, often I don't, you know, right? So yeah. Other than that, everything else is pretty standard. I held a Red AMA in June just to address any concerns folks had post-election season that things got kind of hectic. In terms of environmental sustainability, my role in that department is fairly hands-off. They're quite autonomous, which is great. Environment committee meets every week, and they're doing a lot of really cool workshops, like a do-it-yourself soap making workshop. They just had a climate negotiations sort of event this past weekend where it was like MUN but for climate change, which was super cool. And yeah, they're doing great work. In terms of family care, this section is interesting because my involvement with the daycare is very much as a result of not having a daycare director nor having a general manager who would typically supervise the daycare director. So I sort of acted as like an interim daycare director / just like administrative aide to the person, the educator in the daycare who was taking on that role. For those of you that don't know, so all undergraduates pay, I think it's a $1.56 fee to fund the daycare, and we prioritize undergraduate students with dependents in said service, which is pretty cool. We've been around for over a decade now, and all summer we were conducting interviews for the daycare director, who has now been hired as of last Monday, so woohoo, slowly getting more folks on board. And in terms of what that's entailed, our MOA with PGSS is expiring soon, as is our lease with the university, so in the Brown building. So those are two contracts that I've been involved with, preparing for negotiations with and whatnot. And in terms of family care, something exciting, and is a new part of my portfolio, is basically to help provide more support resources for students with dependents, because as you can imagine, it's a huge accessibility concern, and balancing parenthood and academia is a massive undertaking. So we've hired a family care commissioner recently, both to help with projects and also to help with the administrative duties that come with the lack of a daycare director. And yeah, we're slowly finding issues that have come up over the past 6 months with the absence of said leadership, but hoping to tend to that soon. And then in this section, it's kind of things that didn't really fit into any areas of my portfolio. And the most exciting one is the Centraide campaign. So for those of you that don't know, the Centraide campaign is an annual fundraising drive that McGill puts on for Centraide, which is the French version of the United Way. Funds over 350 local NGOs in Montreal who do really great work, some of which you might have heard of, such as Dans la Rue, Head and Hands, Centre Paul Roulant, great organizations that do things for all sorts of causes like mental health, isolation, underprivileged youth, education, things like that. So we're having an apartment crawl, which the link to which is right here. I encourage you folks all to come. We're also having a pancake breakfast and a goods night. And we're also launching the first ever Centraide Cup, which is exciting. Essentially what it is, it's an inter-faculty competition to raise the most funds for Centraide. I, like you maybe, at first was quite skeptical, these large umbrella funding organizations, like what their role is in helping like grassroots community organizations was a bit muddled for me, but I realized that if you go on their website, I should have actually included the link, it breaks down for you how much they contribute to each organization, and yeah, it's 85% of what you donate goes directly to those groups, so a really great cause, and I encourage you folks to check it out. In terms of other things, yeah, that's just basically a breakdown. Below, just for clarity's sake, I gave you folks a breakdown of what the general manager's task delegation, I guess, resulted in terms of my work. And yeah, I encourage you folks to read more of this. I don't want to bore you too much with the fine-grained details, but I look forward to segueing my report into this discussion on the restructuring of Ssmu portfolios, because the biggest takeaway message, I guess, from all of this is not the details of what our jobs have entailed, but is more the unsustainability of the executive portfolios. It's been pretty hectic this year. Most of the execs work like 80-hour work weeks, and that's not even at times fulfilling all of the obligations that we hope you are holding us accountable to. So yeah, in the interest of adequate service provision, we hope to continue that discussion. So I'll end it there. I'd like to have a little personal section, because I think it's cool to not be so, I guess, like formal about this process, because we're all human, and yeah, I thought I would share that little brief tidbit about what it's like. So thanks.
Any question for the president? Yes.
Matthew Satterthwaite, Arts and Science. Last year when I sat on the President's Roundtable, it was mostly just Ssmu telling faculties information and wasn't really discussion based. I'm wondering how you're fostering, or what kind of an atmosphere you foster at the President's Roundtable, and how you're engaging faculties in Ssmu and fostering a better relationship with those associations.
I'm actually super stoked you asked that question, because it's been something I've really tried to change. I know people, especially with President's Roundtable, it's like a group where folks don't feel necessarily too compelled to come and participate, because it's yeah, there's no necessarily mission statement behind what we do. But yeah, I tried to install like a structure where we would have a rotating chair at the beginning of the year, so folks would feel empowered to guide our activities and whatnot. But that, yeah, folks, I guess, we're not, I guess, super eager to do that, but what I have been doing is before every meeting I send out the agenda and folks can add items, and I definitely try to make sure that it's not centered around Ssmu's activities, although I'm definitely not reluctant to include stuff about, let's say the Centraide campaign and things like that. And a big part of what I see Ssmu's role on President's Roundtable is really to help, provide resources and help where necessary, especially with some of the smaller faculty associations that struggle with transition and with institutional memory. Some of the documents that we have floating around, like exit report templates or like managers' guides for people who have staff, those are things I'm always trying to think of disseminating to faculty associations, because we, being so massive, have all these resources, and to just share that with others, I think helps them feel like they have a role in that group. So that's what we've been doing.
Any other question for the president?
Thank you.
Thank you. So now I'm going to move to the new business item, but the presentation of the audited financial statement can't happen at this time, because this is a business that can only be treated by a General Assembly, because it has to be voted upon. So, does it have to be voted upon? I'm going to strike what I just said, and there's going to be a presentation on the audited financial statement by the Vice President, Finance and Services. Oh, this was before? Okay, strike that again. Sorry, guys. So there's going to be the discussion regarding the restructuring of the Ssmu portfolios first. I'm going to let the President Ibrahim start by introducing us to the discussion. We're going to cap the discussion to 20 minutes, but it can be extended as per the wishes of this assembly. So.
Cool. So if you folks want to put up the document. So yeah, this discussion essentially is what we want to do. We've been thinking about it a lot, And despite the exceptional circumstances of this year with the resignation of both our general manager and VP internal, something that we've come to realize is that over the past decade, Ssmu's activities have expanded exponentially. A lot of the portfolios have taken on new departments. We have like twice as many student staff. We have a new operation. There are many reasons to account for which it's really not very sustainable right now, and we're trying to find a solution. This is in no way final. This is not even a decision. In fact, the executives and council and senators have no agreement regarding what we want to do, but we wanted to consult you folks before we begin the brunt of the brainstorming process to see what you think we can do to help solve this issue. As you can see here, hopefully you can. I'll try to summarize essentially, but many of the portfolios could easily be split in half between two people, meaning adding another executive, and be undertaken in said fashion. And these are considerations we've had because not just this year, but every year, a trend that we see is executive burnout. Near the end of the year, we're trying to get things for transition started up, exit reports, things like that. People kind of they're done. They've worked like 70-hour work weeks since the beginning of June, and there's been stressful situations. There's been all sorts of things that contribute to them wanting to kind of just leave this building and never come back. Maybe that's a bit negative, but in essence, it's not really untrue, to be honest. So lightening the workload is definitely not something we're reluctant to do. And just for a fun fact, in our contracts, it actually stipulates 70 hours a week. So I mean, I'll leave it to you to decide, but on top of a part-time course load, that's probably not the healthiest. We have dialogues about mental health ongoing in the workplace and in our activities in the University Affairs portfolio, and it seems a bit dissonant that for the executives we ask them to work 70 hours a week. This year has become especially obvious because now it's more like 80, 85 with the resignations that we've seen recently. So we're trying to think of how to go about this. We have multiple considerations, and these are not necessarily, although they say proposed structures, I really want to emphasize this is not us saying we have two ideas, which one do you want to choose? We have ideas, we don't have a solution yet, because once again, no one is quite in agreement regarding what we could do. And I'll allow the other executives at any point to come jump in and chime in if they want to give details, but I'll give a brief overview. So there are three portfolios that desperately need restructuring. And our most primary consideration thus far is to add a seventh executive, but we don't know in what capacity. For example, the Vice President and Finance and Operations portfolio could easily be split in two because not only have we added a new operation recently, but we, as Ssmu, want to be generally actually be as student run as we claim to be, and not necessarily have the activities of our operations entirely guided by folks who are not students. So to have a larger role in that would go well. In addition, the finances don't ever really get as much attention as they should to keep the different departments of our society accountable and processes in a good way. So that is one portfolio that could easily be split in two. The portfolio of the Vice President Clubs and Services is another that also could easily be divided in places. So as Kimber mentioned, she not only manages the building, which is a massive undertaking, but also is the point of contact, support, and all sorts of other things for all student groups. So over 200 clubs, the 20 services, and things of the like. Although those two roles don't necessarily interrelate a lot, it's an incredibly administrative role, and I think Kimber can speak to it well over the past years. VBC and SS have found that to be very, very demanding. The last one I'll touch on, because you'll find that my portfolio and the VP external portfolio don't really change in this because they're kind of okay as they are right now. But the Vice President University Affairs portfolio could also easily be split because the role of liaising with the university and allocating students, members at large, student senators to over 50 university committees, and really being active on the forefront of making sure that we're holding the admin accountable to all the promises they make and student demands is like a full-time endeavor. But in addition, over the past decade, we've seen the addition of mental health, equity, libraries. There's a lot of things that have been added in that portfolio that need a lot of attention to be done well and aren't getting as much as they need to, given that they're there. So, in brief, we have some ideas. Another thing that I'll add is another thing that's been floated on the table is basically a structure where we'd have associate vice presidents. So as opposed to adding a 7th executive, perhaps what we could do is we would have associate vice presidents who could be full-time students or part-time students and could take on roles of also supervising student staff, but being slightly delegated, unfortunately in the hierarchy is how it would work, to under the supervision of some of the vice presidents. So that would also open up the door for students in some of the professional fields who must take full-time course loads in their later years, namely education, nursing. I'm sure there's more. And that was mentioned at our last council meeting. So from an access point of view, that's kind of cool. And yeah, so essentially I'd love to open the floor up to your ideas. I'm not sure if you folks can really see what's up on the screen, and I hope that if you can't, you're making an effort to either move forward or go on your laptops, because these documents are accessible online. But we would love to hear your thoughts regarding this restructuring. If you feel like different parts of different portfolios need to stay together, or if you feel like perhaps we should have this associate vice president sort of structure. If we were to move forward with this process, it would have to be quite soon, because as you know, elections begin in the referendum in end of January, and to be passed, these things have to go through multiple readings of our council. So yeah, please don't hesitate to come up, ask clarifying questions, contribute your thoughts. We would love to hear what you have to say. Thanks.
So if anyone wants to contribute to this discussion, please come forward to the mic. This is fairly an open discussion, so please just state your concerns in favor of change or no change, or preference in structure, or the idea of associate vice presidents. The mic is open.
Aaron Sobat Arts. I was actually just wondering if you could expand on the option of adding more student staff and why that may or may not alleviate some of the issues that were raised.
So for those of you that couldn't hear, Aaron basically asked if we could elaborate on adding more student staff. So this is also definitely an option on the table that we don't want to neglect. We have over 70 student staff under our portfolios right now, and adding more to manage some of the different aspects of these portfolios mentioned is a possibility. Something that I, as the executive that oversees human resources, that I want to speak to is how incredibly difficult it is for the executives on an annual basis to balance the role, the political and managerial aspects of the role. I mean, you know that in offices and in organizations, there are staff fully dedicated to supervising other staff, and I don't really want to underplay how important that role is. You can also speak with any of the student staff at Ssmu and ask them what it's like. But a trend that we see on an annual basis is that things are very busy in the office with Ssmu politics, whatever, and the managerial aspect of the executive role is often neglected simply due to the fact that it's not often feasible for us to have time to check in with our staff, assess their goals, do conflict resolution, and make sure they have the resources they need to do their jobs when there are other many pressing things on the table. I want to clarify that is obviously my bias. There are maybe many positives to having more student staff versus other structures, but I do want to emphasize that adding staff comes at a cost, and that's something that I think I also too sometimes forget. When you add a student staff, you also add more work for the HR department in the Ssmu. You also add more work for the executive committee, who will be responsible for approving the hiring and for all that sort of stuff. So although it does come with additional work, there are also potentially benefits too. So I do want to outline that as a possibility. Thanks, Aaron.
Anyone else wants to come forward? Members of council, there were a discussion at last council meeting. Maybe some of you could come state forward if you've taken position at previous council on your concerns.
Or if any of the executives want to come and chat as well. Okay, awesome. Woo-hoo.
Both of you can go.
Participation.
Sean Taylor, Science. Yeah. I was wondering what your timeline is that you're proposing for this. Like these are two versions that are proposed, but taking these or editing it, when would you want to see a final proposal and then moving forward with that done?
Great question. So in order to add, let's say, add an elected position, so be it an associate vice president or a vice president, we would have to have this sorted out by December 3rd. Any changes to the internal regulations, which is what we would be changing in order to have these folks elected, we would need to go through 2 readings of council, and that would also need to happen before the referendum for the new election begins. So if you count the councils, there's one on the 28th and the 14th of January, and there's one on the 3rd of December. So for it to go through 1 and 2 readings, 1 for information, and then 1 for approval, we'd have to have it done by December 3rd. So it leaves us with just under a month, which is not a lot of time, which is why we were hoping to have this discussion here. We're having a meeting next Thursday, just so you all know. And although this invitation was sent to our council, I would not rule it. I think it's completely cool if anyone here, a member of the society, wants to come and join that discussion as well. And yeah, one other thing that I want to also clarify for those of you that are less familiar, the reason we have 2 readings at council, which means it comes to 1 meeting and then it gets pushed to the next one, is because the first one is a notice. So essentially what happens is we notify all of councillors, we say, hey, this is coming forward, do you have any questions? We get all the questions, and then they go back to the faculty associations or their constituencies, they say, hey, I talked to Ssmu council, they said this, yada, 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 what do you think? Get that feedback, come back for the second reading, and that's when they can say, okay, hey, well, I talked to my people and they're not down, and then maybe, we have debate, etc., and things get approved that way. That's a structure we have in place to just make sure that nothing just gets kind of fast-tracked without really getting people's input.
Any other questions or discussion item?
This is a discussion item. Can you hear me? I'm Becky. I'm from Arts. I'm an arts rep. And this is more of a discussion item. I just wanted to speak on behalf of the notion of associate VPs, because not only does it increase accessibility for students who are in higher level programs, it takes away the complications of needing to apply for a work permit if you're an international student, and it also increases financial accessibility for a lot of students who are on loans that stipulate that they have to complete their degree in 4 years, as well as scholarship students. So I think the idea of adding smaller positions wherein people could keep full course loads is really positive. So thanks.
That's awesome. Did everybody hear that? Cool. Do you want me to say, or do you want to come here? Okay, cool. Basically what Becky said was that they're really in favor of associate vice presidents, because it not only would increase accessibility to folks who didn't previously have access, maybe it's international students who can't get work permits, maybe it's folks who are on scholarships who need to get their degrees completed within 4 years, and maybe it's also students who have to have full-time course loads due to their program. So that's something that they spoke highly in favor of. I guess something I want to ask you folks as well is can be a sort of back and forth, because I understand that this is kind of a really blank slate discussion, so it's hard to stimulate. But if we were to have associate vice presidents, do you see any of these portfolios really needing restructuring nonetheless? For example, something that was communicated to folks as being a good thing, like potentially things that would work really well together, would be the VP operations also managing the building. That's just one example of many here, but the reason that's noteworthy is because a lot of work is created when 2 executives essentially dabble within the same departments so frequently that they're always working together. And I think Zach and Kimber can speak to this. Building management really coincides a lot with the operations, and coincides a lot, that's basically it. That's just one example. So my question to you folks is, if we were to, let's say, add who knows, 3 associate vice presidents, do you see any necessity or positive realities behind said reallocations, or do you think status quo is fine? I'm seeing some looks of concern on Kimber's face. So Kimber says status quo is not fine. FYI, everybody. I'm sorry, I misspoke. Please, folks, feel free to speak up. given the fast-track nature of this process, we may be holding hopefully maybe a town hall in late November, but if these discussions are expedited, we may see these changes happening under a month. So this is a great opportunity to share your thoughts if you have any.
Hi, Igor Shadikov, Arts. Well, yeah, speaking as, I guess, someone who is not a part of Council or Ssmu, but has been following this for a while, like to me, yeah, it's pretty clear that there's a necessity, as you say, to, yeah, like split some of the responsibilities in terms of the clubs and services, building management, the university affairs portfolio, especially as well. So maybe I was wondering if, like, the execs could speak to if there were to be associate VPs, like which of these responsibilities could be delegated and which couldn't perhaps be delegated, because to me it seems if you are preserving this like hierarchical structure, then the VP will still have to be involved in all of these things, and given that some of these portfolios are so broad, yeah, it's hard for me to see what exactly could be delegated efficiently. So if anybody wants to speak to that.
Thanks. Just did everyone hear what was said? Okay, maybe I'll trade mics down here so folks can hear in the future. But basically what Igor said was that they, being part of the student media who follow these things closely, agree that we need to do some changing to lighten the workloads, and was wondering what kind of actual responsibilities would any of these associate VPs have, because given the hierarchical structure it would still put a lot of the work on the executives. In terms of, is this fine? Okay. My personal, oh, great. Chloe has some thoughts. Awesome.
I have to speak really loud.
Yeah, so I think that the answer of what can and cannot be delegated to student staff, it would obviously depend on every portfolio. And one of the challenges obviously with student staff specifically is that they turn over often every year, so there's a certain training period and time in which they need to get oriented and acclimatized to their role. One of the things that we are doing though is we're looking at how other executive portfolios are structured, so how are associate VPs, what is their responsibilities and what is their role at other universities and other student unions, so that could help us guide what structure would look like and what those responsibilities could be delegated. I mean, I can speak in my portfolio, literally, I have a student staff attached to pretty much every single section of my portfolio already. I have 2 mental health coordinators, 2 equity commissioners, a library improvement fund coordinator, an academic research commissioner, university affairs secretary general, et cetera, and there's still a lot of work that I can't delegate, you're right. So how can we change that? Maybe an associate VP takes on more leadership and more supervision of those student staff, and then, there's a lot of question marks on that front, but I know that's how other universities do it. So looking at some of those structures and then coming back and seeing how they apply to Ssmu would be a good idea. Anything else?
Just to add to what Chloe was saying, I think, I guess a thought that I had is that perhaps there need not be this hierarchical structure, and no associate VP could be a VP that simply has half of the work of the average VP, but sits on executive committee with equal, I guess, power per se, so therefore there didn't need to be that sort of chain of command that would just increase the work of the executive associated with that AVP. So that's definitely an option. It would basically just mean adding another executive, but calling it associate and having it have half as many responsibilities to therefore be able to take on a full-time course load at the same time. I'm not sure if anyone has any thoughts on that.
Yeah, Francois Paul, Science. There's actually another issue that we should probably consider as well. An associate VP sounds like he would have considerably much more power than a normal person that, well, not a normal person, but an average student that is working for Ssmu. And I wonder, would that mean that an associate VP has to be elected? And if not, how could we maintain this sort of process that Ssmu has always combined, that allowing students to decide what we're doing, if we have, for example, differing ideas on the politics of operations, and now we're going to delegate fully or almost fully to one person?
I guess to answer that, in part, I think they definitely will be elected, so I hope that satisfies the majority of those concerns, and they would be held accountable in the same way as their executives are held accountable. I'm not sure if that answers your question, Paul. Yeah.
Lauren Toccolino, I'm from Music. How will the creation of new executive positions affect the budget and the funds that are allocated to the current executives and paying their salaries?
Thanks. I think Zach can answer that question.
So, to examine how to pay a 7th executive, a lot of different things need to be considered. In terms of how it would affect the current executive salaries, it's unlikely that you know, the 6 executive. Yeah, that's my bad. I'm just gonna hold this. So it's unlikely that the executive salaries would be affected because they already make, to be honest, about $5 to $6 an hour if you divide the actual work they do by their salaries. So even if you add a 7th executive, you'd need to add, you know, another 4 until the executives started making anything like around minimum wage for the amount of hours that they put in. I don't personally, it wouldn't be my decision as the VP Finance. I don't decide on salaries, but I would not recommend that that the board of directors reduce the executive salaries. Notably, although we may have a bias, we don't really have a conflict of interest there unless we're planning on rerunning, which I don't think any of us are. So, in terms of the budget is tight, but there's always room. I was asked at council if we could afford to pay a 7th executive, and the answer is certainly yes. The money is there if you want to start cutting other departments, but it becomes a question of priorities, and at this point in time, I'm not confident saying that we could pay a 7th full-time executive, the salary that we pay executives now, without significant cuts that would affect the services that we can provide to our members. So one option that should be considered to pay a 7th executive is to look into raising the base fee because of all these other changes that we're proposing as well. That would require higher revenues, and that hasn't been done in a while. Other options include, well, there are other options, but to be honest, I have not examined them yet because the first step is deciding whether or not we want to do a 7th executive, and then funding proposals would come forward. But notably, $30,000 out of $4 million annual revenues is doable, and the money could be found if we wanted it to without raising the base fee.
Cool. I'll add some more thoughts, so hopefully you folks can also have some things if you want to mention them. For the issue that was pointed out as being the biggest with the first proposal is that essentially separating equity from university relations was seen as being an issue because they're so directly intertwined as being very related to advocacy and conversations with the administration. If anyone wants to add anything to what we saw as being an issue with the first one, please do. You can just raise your hand, it's all good. And the second structure, we saw difficulties because what would now be seen as the VP internal position was the exact same structure as what was had 15 years ago, where the person who managed all the student groups also ran all the events and communications of the society. And that was actually the VP clubs and services position was actually made out of that situation because they saw it as being unsustainable and therefore separated it into a position that would do events and communications, and the other one which would be managing all the student groups of the society. So the second one we kind of recreated an issue that already existed, and the first one also poses an issue. We haven't done a lot of brainstorming regarding the associate VPs. But I personally think it has a lot of worth given the increasing the audience that could apply to Ssmu positions, I guess. Does anyone have any particular thoughts regarding which ones would go well as associate vice presidents? For example, another thought we had was grouping all of the equity-related things together, and we could potentially have an associate vice president responsible for those things. We could have associate vice presidents doing the operations. Some of the things, I'm just going to spitball here, and I'd love to hear your feedback, that we probably would not delegate to an associate vice president is something like the society's communications, simply because those things are pretty holistic in nature and touch on all the portfolios and is like a full-time endeavor. Anyone have any thoughts?
We've pretty much been done with set, but we can always extend it if people still want to speak. Okay, seeing none, thank you, President Ibrahim. Let's move to the next item on the agenda, which is the presentation of the audited financial statements. I'll invite Vice President Houston to come forward to make his presentation.
Okay, so I'm going to go through these fairly quickly because I have to make this presentation again at the Winter General Assembly because we are so far from quorum right now. However, I wanted to go through them quickly because waiting till winter to present the financial statements for the year that ended in May just seems a little too late. So I'm going to go through them quickly and then open the floor up to questions for anyone who has them. Notably, this is not the best sort of venue to go through financial statements. I know that you can barely see them. I'm going to try my best to do this presentation. Okay, so this is the balance sheet. This shows kind of our financial status at the end of last year, which was May 31st. Things of note, our investment portfolio did well last year. The investment portfolio was at $3.5 million at the end of the year, which is pretty good. The bylaws mandate that it stay above $2.5 million, so there's definitely some room to spare there. The University Center Building Fund ended the year with a positive balance. That means that the building fee being charged is less than our annual rent, which is good because our rent is going to increase over the next few years. So it was supposed to start accumulating a positive balance. I'm going to move on to the next page. Okay, so the Capital Expenditure Reserve Fund, that's kind of the second column there, had $167,000 in investment revenue. As I said, that's because the investment portfolio did quite well last year. There's more detail on that in the notes for those who are interested. As you can see, sort of there, that's the surplus or deficit for each of our funds. So the operating fund ran a $214,000 surplus last year. That was primarily due to the funding committee and the services, but I will talk a bit more about that when we get to the last page. Gertz Bar had $540,000 in revenues and $530,000 in expenses. That's great. It's basically a break even, which is what it should be. And last year, the Nest had $76,000 in revenues and $143,000 in expenses. So that is roughly a $70,000 deficit for the Nest. One of the things that we did to remedy that this year was to open up the new food operation, which has a much lower food cost than the Nest, so we're hoping to see significantly better numbers this year, but notably $70,000 deficit for the Nest is roughly what was budgeted at the beginning of the year last year. On the next page, you have a statement of cash flows. This is probably the least relevant financial statement to all of you, so I'm gonna skip past it, but feel free to ask questions if you have them. The next 8 or so pages are just notes. Again, if you have questions about any of the notes, feel free to email me or to ask them, but I'm not going to read them to you. And I want to go to the last page. So in the bottom section of this, kind of here, is where it shows our actuals for 2015 versus what we budgeted. You can see that student fees were pretty much right on par. Gertz Bar was pretty much right in line with what we budgeted. However, the Nest Cafe was significantly off. That was due to a budgeting error in the February budget revision, where a negative value was entered as a positive number. As I said, about a $70,000 deficit is what the Nest was initially budgeted for last year, so that was kind of unfortunate that that budgeting error was made, because otherwise it would have been right on track with the budget. Everything else is pretty reasonable, and then you get to the funding committee, which had a $66,000 surplus, and the services, which ran a $242,000 surplus. So those balances are restricted in our student life fund. So you basically have to adjust our $214,000 surplus to not account for the surplus run by the funding committee and the services. And the clubs at the very bottom line above the $214,000, clubs ran a $100,000 deficit last year, which basically means that they just spent more money than they earned from the balances that it accumulated over the last 50 years of clubs, and it affected our bottom line. So that's something that I changed over the summer, was we changed the bylaws so that the club bank balances are restricted in a separate fund and don't affect the SMU's final surplus or deficit, so that won't happen again in the future. But this year, you basically are looking at about a $50,000 deficit to the operating fund after you account for the fact that the clubs and the services and the funding and the other restricted balances kind of throw off the number. But just to be clear on that, technically and legally, SMU ran a $214,000 surplus, but after all of the restricted balances are transferred to their restricted funds, we had to take $50,000 roughly from our capital expenditure reserve fund to cover the remaining deficit to the operating fund. It's very confusing, but for the most part you can think of it as an effective deficit of $50,000, which doesn't sound great, but at the same time, with 1.7 million in student fees, it's not as bad as it probably sounds, to be honest. And that was last year. I'm not being self-congratulatory. Anyway, questions?
The floor is open for questions, if there are any, on the audited financial statements. If there are any, I know the Vice President would be happy to answer them outside this forum if necessary.
Sean, Science. If the Nest continues to run a very large deficit, are there any plans for what to do with the restaurant or the space in general?
Yeah, that's a really good and tough question. It's something that Operations Management Committee will have to look at this year when they kind of revise the mandate for the student-run cafe. The initial mandate for the Nest that was created, a year or 2 years ago when the cafe opened, said that it should be a break-even. So by that mandate, if it continues to run a deficit and not improve to moving closer to a break-even every year, then it's not meeting its mandate. But the question at that point that we have to ask ourselves is whether or not we want to revise that, and whether or not students want us to revise that, or whether or not the Nest needs to be a break-even, in which case major changes would need to be made, or the Nest would not be able to continue to exist. However, it's very different this year with the new operation that replaced a commercial tenant. So in theory, at the end of the day, the Nest should be generating net revenue to the society to replace the revenue that we used to make from having a commercial tenant in that space. So I think that the mandates need to be rewritten anyway, and we need a more specific plan for kind of what the finances of the Nest and the new food operation should be.
Any other questions?
You mentioned in your presentation that the budget ran like an effective $50,000 deficit, but since it's supposed to actually run a $50,000 surplus, really the department, that the variance of the budget was really $100,000 approximately. Would you be able to summarize maybe some of the sources of that major departmental variance and where we lost essentially a lot of money as per the original budget that was supposed to have a $50,000 transfer or like a $50,000 surplus into SERF?
Yeah. Well, looking at still the bottom section of that statement there, about 50,000 of that came from the nest because the nest was budgeted for a $12,000 deficit and ran a $67,000 deficit. The rest came from primarily from programming activities, which are basically events. Last year, the events were budgeted for $24,000 like of net revenue total, and ran a $46,000 deficit from those departments. So, if I recall correctly, last year that was primarily Frosh. Frosh ran about a $50,000 deficit, which was more than was initially reported, but later in the year there were taxes and stuff that needed to be adjusted for, and I think the rest was little deficits from Faculty Olympics, 4 floors, stuff like that, that I would say primarily Frosh and the nest.
Any other questions?
Marina Smales, Arts and Science, yes. I was wondering if either you or potentially the VP Clubs and Services could potentially talk about how and why the Clubs and Services ran $100,000 over budget. That's what I think was mentioned, yes?
Yeah, just to clarify, and then I'll let you ask your question. The clubs ran a $100,000 deficit, or their expenses exceeded their revenues by $100,000, but the clubs, we don't control their finances. So that just means they spent more than they earned in total last year, over the year. They spent the money that they had in their banks at the beginning of the year, but the services ran a $240,000 surplus altogether.
Okay, so I guess I'll modify my question to ask what is being done to make sure that the clubs do not run over their budgets in future years?
Okay, sorry. So I want to clarify. It's a bit. The clubs do not necessarily have to break even. So when a club finishes 1 year with $10,000 in its bank account and then spends that $10,000 over the next year, that club ran a $10,000 deficit, but it's not actually necessarily a negative thing. So the $100,000 deficit from clubs affected Ssmu's bottom line because it was money that legally belongs to Ssmu that was spent over the year, but the clubs cannot run into the negatives. So it's not actually a bad thing. We just have no way of predicting what money clubs are going to spend over the year, so we don't budget for it, and then at the end of the year when we add up all of the club revenues and all of the club expenses, the difference between them affects our financial statements. But that's something that I fixed over the summer with a board of directors motion to change the way that we account for the club bank balances, and this won't happen in the future because we'll be doing a transfer from the Student Life Fund to offset any effect of what I just described. With the services though, $240,000 surplus is also like pretty far off budget. It's spread across 20 services. To a certain extent, it's appropriate because they have to save up from their student fees, which come in equal amounts every year. They have to save it up in order to buy capital expenditures. So a service that invests in actual capital equipment that's going to last many years might run a surplus for 2 years in a row in order to save that money to buy equipment or whatever in a future year. However, as a whole, the services are accumulating a balance over time. So that's something that we do try to address when we have budget meetings with the services to like plan how they're going to spend that money or examine if possibly a fee is too high. We had an example of a service this term that decided not to renew its fee because it had a surplus. Actually, there might be 2 of them that decided that. So we definitely do encourage like responsible spending and not building up of needless surpluses in the services.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, seeing none, a good round of applause, please. We've now exhausted our agenda for today, so I would need a motion to adjourn. This is moved by Mr. Trick over there, and this is seconded by Mr. Tripp over there. All those in favor of adjourning this meeting? All those opposed? Seeing none, this carries. Thank you.
I'll give you a link today so you can start spamming
I just sent you an email, you should get a reply. Yeah, exactly.
Oh.